Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Senior Managers and Certification Regime, the Next Level of Maturity. I'm Scott Bamford, GRC Product Marketing Manager here at Mitratech, and I'm here to help host and facilitate the event. So let me start by saying that we've got three great speakers for this webinar today. First, I'd like to introduce Michael Rasmussen. Michael is an internationally recognized pundit on governance, risk management, and compliance with over 24 years of GRC industry experience. He's also the founder of GRC 2020 Research, which is a leading industry resource that provides market research, benchmarking, training, as well as in-depth analysis of the GRC market. Michael is also a sought-after keynote speaker. He's an author and advisor. He is often noted as the father of GRC because he was the first to define and model the GRC market in 2002 while he was vice president and top analyst at Forrester Research. And for Mitratech, we've got two speakers. First, we have Jason Cropper, Mitratech's head of global GRC product marketing. Jason is a veteran of the GRC industry with over a decade of experience holding a variety of executive positions in sales, business development, and also product marketing. He is a frequent speaker at Mitratech events. He's a passionate GRC evangelist, and he spends considerable time researching and analyzing the GRC market and technology trends. Also from Mitratech, we've got John Dedman. John is a senior GRC solutions consultant, and he's a subject matter expert on Mitratech GRC products. John spends his time understanding and analyzing client needs and providing tailored Mitratech GRC solutions for them. And those are our three esteemed speakers today. So now before we get started, I just want to set a few housekeeping items to help run this webinar smoothly. First, we are recording the webinar. So following the webinar, we will post the full recording to the Mitratech website, and we'll make that available for everyone. And second, we've got some fantastic content prepared for you today. Now, just to make sure we can get through that content, we ask that you submit any questions that you have via the GoToWebinar chat feature, and we will do our very best to make sure and get to your questions at the end of the session as time allows. Now, if there are any questions that we don't get to, we'll follow up with you directly after the webinar. And then finally, if you have any technical difficulties whatsoever, please let us know via the GoToWebinar chat feature, and we'll take care of you there. So now that the housekeeping items are done with that, and without further ado, I'm now going to pass it over to Michael to get this webinar kicked off.
Excellent, and it is a pleasure to be here today with everybody. I'm Michael Rasmussen of GRC 2020 Research, and looking forward to interacting with each and every one of you on this critical topic of GRC in the context of senior management regime, the UK senior management regime, and what organizations can do to mature their processes and take it to the next level. So in that context, you know, there's a lot happening out there right now, and in the context of regulation around the world for financial services firms. I'll talk a little bit about this in a few slides as far as the number of regulations and things. But the one thing that really is, you know, coming to my attention is the fact that, you know, these regulations are causing a lot of interconnectedness of requirements and focus and things like that, and it reminds me of chaos theory. A couple of years ago, I was doing a workshop that was being hosted at the Royal Society there in London. Not for the Royal Society, that'd be really neat, but it was at the Royal Society, so just being hosted there. And I was doing this presentation in this room. They had it was beautiful oak paneled room, wood paneled room, and there's portraits of scientists all around the room. And all these portraits look like real portraits. They look like the real person, except for the one on my far right. That portrait looked different. And so the chaos theories where the flutter of a butterfly's wings in the Netherlands has tiny atmospheric changes that have a cascading impact that can influence the development path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. You know, this is the chaos of risk and compliance interconnectedness, where those little issues can become big issues and challenges for the organization. You look at something like the JP Morgan whale incident from a few years back, multiple billion-dollar loss on JP Morgan. And one of the most significant contributing factors in that context was a spreadsheet error. Those little things matter. You know, Leonardo da Vinci stated, realize that everything connects to everything else. That in that context, We live in this interconnectedness, risk and compliance environment, and we need to be able to see these relationships and this interconnectedness. So in that context, we're seeing that compliance itself is in a transition from old ways to new ways of accountability. Where the past, we had a lot of compliance focused on things like, check boxes and tick boxes. The future, we're looking at greater accountability, greater understanding of and accountability for risk and compliance across the organization. One respect, we've seen this in how laws are written. Before the FCA, we had the FSA in the United Kingdom, and with the FSA, you had what was developed called principles or outcome-based regulation. And this spread across Europe as part of the EU's better regulatory policy, but it is focused on what's the outcome. We're not going to necessarily tell you the check boxes and tick boxes. We're going to focus on the outcome. While in the US where I live, I get over to London 8 to 10 times a year, so I spend a couple months on the ground in London every year. But I live in the United States. We have a much older compliance regime that's focused more on check boxes or tick boxes. Give me my list of requirements, and then I want my get out of jail free card if I check all of them. But the future is looking more towards principles and outcome-based compliance, and looking at greater accountability. How do we hold individuals more responsible and accountable for governance, risk, and compliance in the organization? So this has become critical. And one particular area where we're seeing that this has become critical is in the UK senior managers regime and certification regime. Apologize, I'm getting a little trigger happy there, it looks like. So the UK senior managers and certification regime, I liken to Tolkien's One Ring. I'm a huge Tolkien fan, J.R.R. Tolkien. And of course, those that follow the Lord of the Rings trilogy, that there's the one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. To me, when you look at the UK senior managers and certification regime, it's that one regulation to rule them all, one regulation to find them, which being things like risk, compliance, and control, governance, and oversight, one regulation to bring them all, and in the enforcement bind them. So to me, I define the UK senior managers and certification regime as the Uber regulation. The broad swathing regulation that enforces all other regulations in the organization. Because basically we're defining senior manager accountability for risk and control and compliance oversight, and they are personally accountable and can be personally fined for failures and lack of due diligence in those areas and misconduct. And so it becomes critical because it could be a GDPR issue. So you have GDPR regulation, the EU's Global Data Protection Regulation, and you can have a senior manager under UK senior managers regime that's mapped to privacy and personal data protection in context of UK GDPR that can be held personally liable and have that enforced. I was doing a workshop in London several months back, and the workshop was on third-party management, managing the vendor and supplier risk. And there's about 20 of the top banks in London that were at this workshop I was hosting. And one of the leading banks in London led a whole discussion during the workshop and how they've actually mapped, third-party management responsibilities, like vendor risk and compliance in their outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, temporary workers, and so forth, that they've actually mapped third-party risk and compliance responsibilities into the senior managers regime, and have a senior manager responsible for the risk and compliance oversight of third-party executives. And so for third-party relationships. So in that context, to me, the UK senior managers and certification regime is that one regulation that rules them all, that goes out and enforces all the other regulations in the environment by providing for personal accountability on senior managers and executives within the financial services firm. So what's key here is understanding accountability versus responsibility. In the past, we had responsibility where people were designated tasks and they had to complete them and they were responsible for that. Now we have a new era of regulation that is clearly about accountability. And that's, to me, what the UK senior managers regime is about that accountability, that not only are you responsible, but you are personally accountable. If there is a lack of due diligence in this area, where you do not hold to a standard duty of care, or market misconduct in this area, that senior manager can be personally fined. I believe it's up to 6 years, after the incident. and so that there's personal accountability that goes beyond responsibility in this area that what we're seeing with UK senior managers regime. So let's take a little bit deeper look at this. In this context, we have a focus to improve genuine accountability by removing the ambiguity and clarifying individual responsibilities. The Financial Conduct Authority requires genuine engagement of senior managers and individuals. And so when we deal with this UK senior managers and certification regime, we got a couple different levels. We got the senior managers who can be held accountable for misconduct that falls within their responsibility. So in that, you include, executive roles, oversight roles. The FCA clearly defines the lines of defense and control roles, so our GRC roles, for being the different levels of defense, being operational management, being the front line, the second line being risk and compliance, security, control type, back office individuals, managers, and of course, the third line being audit. But then you have individuals that fall under the certification regime. Individuals at all levels need to be held to appropriate standards of conduct. These can be material risk takers, significant management roles, customer-facing roles, the line managers of certified people. So like the senior manager might be the chief risk officer or chief compliance officer or others in that lines of defense above. But then the individuals that report to that individual all fall under the certification regime too. So things to be aware of. And different little points on a lot of these, and so it's hard to cover everything just in a short presentation as well. But because there's a lot of intricacy into exactly who falls into what scope of roles. But let's look at this at 3 levels of accountability. You have senior management roles, and these roles have to be pre-approved by the regulators, and they're subject to fit and proper assessments by the firm, and this needs to be done annually. They're subject to conduct rules. And there has to be clearly defined statements of responsibility, and organizations need to build out responsibility maps. Criminal record checks and regulatory references need to be provided. That's all under the senior managers regime. Under the certification regime, you have the annual certification is fit and proper by the firm of those individuals, or the broader swath of employees. The certification regime is overseen by senior managers. There needs to be regulatory references, and again, they're subject to conduct rules. All other staff, except for what the FCA describes as ancillary staff, are subject to the conduct rules. So one thing to be clearly aware of here, across the employees of the organization, whether they're senior management, certification employees, or just the general staff beyond that, to meet the senior managers regime requirements, you have to be able to communicate conduct rules across all of these different levels of employees. So the one underlying factor beyond all the process and everything else between a senior management and a certification employee and other staff is that all this staff needs to be clearly communicated conduct rules, basically policies, code of conduct, and responsibilities needs to be clearly communicated to these different roles at all these different levels in the organization. So when it comes to the management responsibility statements and MAP, here, the organization needs to create a statements of responsibilities record with the relevant prescribed responsibilities with a summary of those on the responsibility maps. So the statement of responsibility is the detailed, written description of responsibilities, but then there's a high-level responsibility map that summarizes these. And so these statements and maps need to be able to describe the management and governance arrangements and structure, the senior management and their responsibility, reporting lines, allocation of responsibilities, and how management and governance arrangements fit within the group. So from that perspective, what is the common theme that we have here across all these different roles, whether they're senior managers roles, certification roles, or if they are other employees that are outside the scope of that. These are policies on conduct that need to be communicated to all levels of employees. And the FCA specifically spells out, the conduct rules for individuals. So no matter who you are in the organization, the conduct rules are: you must act with integrity, you must act with due skill and care and diligence. You must be open to cooperate. You must be open and cooperative with the FCA and the PRA and other regulators. You must pay due regard to the interests of customers and treat them fairly. You must observe proper standards of market conduct. Those are the rules that apply broadly. But then there's the specific senior manager conduct rules, where they must take responsible steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible is controlled effectively. You must take reasonable steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible complies with the relevant requirements and standards. You must take reasonable steps to ensure that any delegation of your responsibilities to an appropriate person and that you oversee this effectively. And you must disclose appropriately any information of which the FCA or PRA would reasonably expect notice. Now, we've had similar types of conduct and codes of conduct and things in the past. I can think of here in the United States, like Sarbanes-Oxley. For Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, we get a lot of communication of code of conduct on an annual basis. In fact, in my former employer, Forrester Research, in context of Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, I was actually communicated the code of conduct on a quarterly basis. So some organizations take this further and don't just do annual attestations of code of conduct and conduct rules, but actually do it maybe on a quarterly basis. But we need to be able to communicate these rules out, basically code of conduct, the conduct rules, and get attestations on them from the employees on some type of periodic basis, at least annually. And one of the clear things that where the senior managers regime exposes the senior managers to liability, such as personal fines, is if the misconduct was deliberate or the standard of conduct was below that which would be reasonable. What also is important to note is that the UK senior managers and certification regime is having a global impact. Besides the UK SMR in the United Kingdom itself, one thing to note is that it does apply broadly across the world. So, organizations that operate in the United Kingdom, so financial services organizations that might be headquartered in the United States and other places, but have UK operations fall under scope of UK senior managers regime. But also the UK senior managers regime, requires that the senior manager roles, be clearly defined and understood in overseas offices as well. So you might be a financial services firm headquartered in London or elsewhere in the United Kingdom, but you have offices in other parts of the world. The UK senior managers regime doesn't just apply to the responsibilities for your UK staff, but also those in the rest of the world, because those can definitely impact the organization. What I find particularly interesting is the spread of this regulation to other regulators. Australia, with their BEAR regulation, the Banking Executive Accountability Regulation, is all modeled after the UK senior managers regime. And so while the United Kingdom, FCA was first to come out with this type of regulation, Australia has followed it, particularly after the Commonwealth Bank money laundering issues and the Royal Commission on Banking in Australia, with the BEAR regulation, the Banking Executive Accountability Regulation. We're also seeing similar regulation come out in Hong Kong and Singapore, Japan, Ireland. And I was just told a few weeks ago that Spain has something in the works too in this area. I haven't actually looked into that one myself, but was told that. And so not only does the UK SMR itself have a global impact as far as operations around the world for financial services organizations operating in the United Kingdom, but you were also seeing similar regulation being modeled after the UK SMR being picked up by other regulators around the world as well. Now, one of the challenges to trying to meet UK SMR compliance is trying to manage change. There's lots and lots of change in our business environments, changing legal, regulatory, and enforcement actions, new laws and regulations, change laws and regulations, enforcement actions, that is, and we have to keep up with that. We have changes in the external risk environment that can impact the financial services firm and UK SMR responsibilities. We also have changes in the internal business itself. Changes in strategy, processes, technology, employees, financial positions, and reserves, and third-party relationships, and mergers and acquisitions. It's a GRC, governance, risk management, compliance challenge, and in that context, UK SMR challenge to keep up with this change in any one of these areas. But one of the most significant challenges is trying to keep all this change in sync. So I could be a big bank that is, like I can think of one bank that had 10% of its workforce, thousands of employees are compliance professionals. 10% of its workforce is compliance professionals. I can hire a ton of compliance professionals to monitor all the legal and regulatory change out there, but does that make me compliant? It certainly doesn't. I can be very knowledgeable about the law and what I have to do, but if I'm not doing it back in the business and the business itself has changed and my processes have changed, I'm out of compliance and I've got significant issues then. And so I have to keep all this change in sync as regulations change, as risk change, as business change, and make sure that I'm in compliance and control and risk is being managed in context of UK SMR across all these areas in sync. And that becomes the huge challenge that organizations are facing. In fact, global financial services firms are dealing with 216 regulatory change events every business day on average. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is a data that's coming out of Thomson Reuters, Regulatory Intelligence Services, and their cost of compliance in 2018 report. But every day on average, there's 216 regulatory change developments around the world, from a new law regulation, a change law regulation, a notice of proposed rulemaking, and enforcement action that impacts financial services firms. That's significant. And so if you think about UK SMR, that I've got to be compliant and I've got accountability for compliance, I've got to keep up with all this regulatory change and keep that in context of business change, that becomes a big challenge for the organization to be able to monitor in the environment. But what's also adding to this challenge is trying to manage UK SMR responsibilities and all the regulations and risks that fall in context of UK SMR. If you're trying to do this in documents, spreadsheets, and emails, it's like Hercules battling the Hydra. Hercules had many battles to fight. One was against this multi-headed dragon, the Hydra, and you cut off one of its heads and multiple heads will grow up in its place. Documents, spreadsheets, and emails are a recipe for disaster. You end up getting hundreds to thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. Let's just talking to one financial services firm, and they're spending 200 FTE hours to build a compliance report. It now takes them a matter of seconds. So in that context, we're moving from 200 FTE hours to build a report to a matter of seconds. If you think about it, if we're trying to manage market conduct rules and conduct rules across the organization, and be able to manage this, it becomes as a struggle when we have hundreds of thousands of different documents, spreadsheets, and emails, communicating market conduct rules and broader conduct rules for UK SMR and other related policies for UK SMR to these individuals, tracking attestations and assessments and compliance. It doesn't have the audit trail and system of record that the regulators are wising up, and they're saying, we want a complete system of record. What was communicated, what individual, what date and time? And how did they sign off and are aware of it? How do we know it was them that signed off on it? So documents by themselves and emails and spreadsheets by themselves don't give you the accountability, audit trail, and system of record needed for UK SMR compliance as well as other compliance initiatives. You need a clear level of accountability and a system of record and audit trail of all the different interactions on what was communicated, what version of what was communicated, what was accepted. Do we know that that person actually accepted it, that was that person and not some proxy or other individual? Was there some type of level of authentication and things? How is all this managed and done? And documents, spreadsheets, and emails certainly don't get you there by themselves. You need technology that has that system of record and audit trail. Furthermore, the organization needs to be able to see the tree as well as the forest, that individual area of risk and compliance, as well as the interconnectedness of risk and compliance to fulfill their UK SMR responsibilities. And in fact, I was just talking to one financial services firm that said that I need to take this illustration further, that not only do we need to see the forest and the tree, but we need to be able to see the leaves on the tree. I need to understand the details of risk and compliance, not just the category of risk and compliance, but get down to the details, the very leaves on the tree, and be able to see all these interconnectedness and relationships to fulfill my UK SMR responsibilities. That's significant. So I challenge organizations that we need to be developing a top-down strategy for the UK senior managers regime, to build out that strategy, to clearly define our UK SMR related processes, like how do we build out our responsibilities map and maintain that? How do we define and manage the overall certification process of employees, as well as the what we have to get approval from the regulators on senior managers, and the communication of policies like the conduct rules and things, and tracking attestations to that, and all those defined processes, and the information technology architecture that can support and enable that in the organization. Policy management, to me, is foundational for governance, risk management, compliance, particularly in context of the UK senior managers and certification regime. GRC is that integrated capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity. Policy management, like conduct rules, it hit all three levels of governance, risk management, and compliance. It is policies and conduct rules that help us reliably achieve objectives. Without policies and these rules, the organization can go in a lot of different directions, including breaking the law. And so we need clearly defined policies, and they need to be communicated so that we can reliably achieve the objectives of the organization, whether they're strategic objectives, department objectives, or process objectives. Policies are risk documents. They address risk. The very fact that we have a policy means somebody's identified a risk. And so policies are risk documents. They help us manage uncertainty by putting boundaries on risks and risk taking. And they help us act with integrity, like complying with the laws themselves. Policies interact with a lot of other parts of the environment. To hit UK senior managers and certification regime, we need to understand and map policies from the conduct rules themselves to other policies that relate to other regulations and things that map to senior managers' responsibilities. So we need to map policies to our regulatory obligations and understand what policies, impact things like GDPR compliance, money laundering, fraud, third-party governance, risk and oversight. Map those policies to those obligations and regulations, map them to the organization and the objectives and the risks in the environment, the controls, the issues, and the senior managers and certified employees themselves. We need to have this contextual understanding of and relationship of policies to the broader enterprise. We need to be able to communicate an overall UK senior managers regime and certification regime accountability and communication plan. What's our goals? How are we going to communicate things? Besides building out that responsibilities map and statements of responsibilities, how are we going to clearly define these responsibilities and what level are we going to communicate them to? How are we going to use technology for this? And how frequent are we going to communicate and remind people on this? To me, it goes beyond just this annual attestation that we're going to get from certified employees and things, but we want to be able to remind those employees regularly on their responsibilities to build a strong ethical culture of accountability within the organization. We need to clearly define who our target audiences are. Who are senior managers in the organization? Who are our employees that need to be certified that fall under those certified those senior managers? What are the other staff that need to be communicated conduct rules? Who are our different types of audiences? How are we going to communicate to those audiences? What's the resources need to provide this communication and track attestations? And so how do we deliver those resources, and how does technology enable that? How do we make these policies, these conduct rules to these different levels of the audience accessible? Are we going to publish things only in English? Are we going to publish things in other languages as well? That needs to be clearly defined. How do we measure and track attestations to make sure that we have all of our senior managers and certified employees that have checked off and are state that they're aware of the conduct rules and have gone through the appropriate training and other things that we're offering on that? All this gets built into the communication plan. From the communication plan, we need to start executing. We need to be able to distribute, the conduct rules and track certification to the conduct rules, and in specific cases, train individuals on their areas of responsibilities and understanding of those as well. From there, technology is what enables UK SMR and senior managers and certification regime. Things like policy management technology that can integrate with our HR and business systems to pick up role changes in the organizations and new employees, so we can ship off those conduct rules and provide visibility and the global reach and accessibility in different languages and easy access to the policies themselves. Technology itself creates that central repository for conduct rules and other related policies, so that those senior managers or certified employees can log in and see all the policies that relate to their specific roles that are mapped in the organization responsibilities, and clearly review those policies and accomplish specific tasks for accountability. Technology enables consistency in how these policies like conduct rules are developed and maintained, and manages the workflow and automation in the environment as well. Strong technology for policy management in context of the UK senior managers and certification regime should enable management reporting. So it doesn't take us 200 FTE hours to build that report on the status of policies and who's attested to conduct rules and everything else by going out and going through hundreds of thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and cutting and pasting and adding up figures and metrics and everything. It can now be a matter of seconds for that report. And technology provides a strong audit trail and system of record that shows that that senior manager, read that conduct rule on that date and time, signed off and attested to it, on this date and time, was reminded of it on these dates and times. We have that audit trail and system of record, and workflow and task with escalation, the ability to collaborate and enforce and monitor the policies in the environment as well. From there, technology for policy management in context of UK senior managers regime should also provide defensible compliance. What version of what conduct rule was communicated to what senior manager or employee on what date and time? What questions were asked? Do we meet our requirements and things? Are there issues of compliance in this area, and were exceptions to compliance and controls documented properly? To be able to have that system of record and audit trail to defend the organization as well as the individual if some mishap does happen in the organization. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to our host today for their Mitratech, for their perspective on what they're offering for the UK senior managers and certification regime.
Thanks, Michael. This is Jason Cropper here from Mitratech. Michael, really appreciate, and this is certainly no different, so I really appreciate that. Again, for everyone on the call, this is Jason Cropper. I'm the Global Head of Product Marketing for the Risk and Compliance Division of Mitratech. Now, for those of you who, and I'm looking through the attendee list here, and I'm assuming that most of you are probably going to be familiar with Mitratech, but for those who are not so familiar, I just want to spend just 30 seconds kind of going through who Mitratech are and our background. So we've been in the world of legal operations, risk and compliance for over 30 years. Many customers globally, primarily in London, EMEA, the US, and also in Asia Pac. And our solutions range, as a software provider from legal operations, we have workflow automation, policy management, risk and compliance, and a lot more. But we're really not here to concentrate on sort of too much on our offering as such. What we really want to do is take some of the topics that Michael has really unearthed on the senior management regime and really look at how technology can help. I'm going to take about 5 minutes just to go through and set the scene slightly, and then I'm going to pass across to my colleague, John Dedman. And John will just give you a visual, and again, John's only going to take about 5 minutes to do so, but just kind of give you a visual about how technology can help with some of the issues that Michael has gone through. Now, in order to do that, one of the first things I wanted to take a look at was reasonable steps. And when we look at that, when we look at the FCA, they really kind of say, you've got to take reasonable steps to ensure that the business or the firm in which you're responsible for is controlled effectively. Now, that's an interesting topic because whether it's the FCA or whether it is, as Michael said, any regulator globally who's now taken a look at this personal accountability on a global scale, reasonable steps is not something which is defined. By design. Every business, every industry works on a different premise. But there's a couple of things which are constant. And those three things often fall around technology, policies and procedures, and adequate training. Now, when we look at technology, what we're really talking about here is, in order to take reasonable steps to ensure that you're controlling your business effectively, do you have technology which enables the most effective and efficient way to handle some of the requirements under SM and CR? Now, when you have the technology in place and you're automated and you're effective and you're efficient, do you have robust policies and procedures in place? Are they being kept up to date? Do you control the regulatory change? Everything that Michael went through, do you have the correct policies and procedures to help people, whether that be the senior managers or the wider employees, understand their roles and responsibilities? And the third one is something which often gets overlooked, which is adequate training. And that's really saying, listen, you've got the technology, you've got the robust policies and procedures, you're doing everything that you should do. But if you don't communicate that to your employees, again, whether that is the mapping responsibilities for the senior managers or the kind of more tactical day-to-day requirements around policies and procedures for your employees, if you don't have that effective communication channel, then all of your efforts are already wasted. So when we look at Are you taking reasonable steps? These three things are the constant for any regulation in many ways. Now, as a vendor, we often speak to a lot of our clients and we're talking about SMNCR, and we come onto that kind of maturity level. And what I really want to take a look at here is, for all of the attendees on the phone, where are you in your journey on SMNCR compliance? And what we often find, and this is my own terminology, I've not taken this from any studies as such, but I really there's so many different blurred lines about where organizations are. But for me, it comes onto one of these three spectrums. The first one is hope. We've done a phase one and we've cobbled together a solution that we hope will get us through in time by the date of compliance. The next one is inefficient, and that is, listen, we are very confident that we have a compliance solution, but we're doing it in a very manual way. It's inefficient and it's not effective as such. But if we get called upon, we can prove our compliance. And then the third kind of maturity level is focused. And what I mean by that is, you've got a great solution in place, whether that be via technology or very efficient processes, but you're focused on almost a tick box regulation, if you will, that Michael brought up before. Now, one thing I will say, if you've hit focus, congratulations, because honestly, that's where you need to be. A lot of organizations are not there, but if you've achieved focus, that's great. But the whole topic behind this webinar is, what's the next level of maturity? So whether you are hope, inefficient, or focused in terms of your maturity level, we as a provider can still help. And what we can do from that is actually provide you with the next level. So when we talk about what that next level is, we're talking about employee risk. What we're saying here is, when you've hit focus, what you have done is got all of the regulations and requirements in place to hit what you need to do in terms of compliance against making sure the roles and responsibilities of senior managers are in place. The problem is, behind that, 82% of policy breaches come from employees. They are your biggest asset, but they are also your biggest risk as an organization. And this was a study actually done by PwC, and it actually says that when you really look at the metrics behind the breaches and employee risk, you'll find that those organizations which have well understood policies suffer fewer breaches. Now, why is that relevant? And the thing to understand here is well understood. Again, it goes back to, if you have solid policies and procedures, but they are not communicated, they are not received well, and they're not understood by employees, you're going to have a higher chance of a breach. And when you go back to the personal accountability, as Michael said, then we have an issue under SMNCR. Apologies, trigger happy, just like Michael was earlier. So last thing before I pass across to my colleague, John, but this really brings us back to something that actually Michael was talking about before, and that is, this is from Grant Thornton that did a survey on this, and they said, in line with SMCR, we would absolutely expect our clients to have a robust first line of defense. And what we mean by the first line of defense here is your operational business units, your employees, your tactical. And that is because personal accountability is no longer a joke. This is something that you need to, as an organization. Michael talks about the top-down approach of making sure that all of the SMNCR requirements are mapped, taken care of, and so on. This next level of maturity that we're talking about is, what do you do now from a bottoms-up approach? How do you ensure that your managers are doing their job, but you protect your managers by ensuring that your employees do the job? And with that, I'm going to pass across to John. And John, again, is going to take about 7, 8 minutes and just kind of visualize some of the challenges we've identified, some of the topics that we've identified, and how technology can actually help overcome these. From a senior management perspective, helping you achieve one of those 3 levels of maturity, hopefully focused, but then the next level onto your employees too. So with that, I'll pass across to John.
Thanks, Jason. Let me just share my screen. As Jason says, I'm going to take you through a very high-level overview of some of the capabilities we have in our solution called Policy Hub, to touch on a few of the main areas that have been discussed throughout the webinar so far. I wanted to start close to the beginning where Michael was talking about the mapping of responsibilities and making sure that their key responsibilities are understood by the senior managers that are affected by them. I'm looking at a particular library that's specialized to me in this particular view, but this is a view on a single repository. So everything from understanding how responsibilities and obligations are being passed out to senior managers, all the way down to individual policies and how they're managed are all done through a single repository. We'll start with the responsibilities map, which is a simple document that I've put together that is detailing the information as would be collected around a particular set of senior management functions and how those senior management functions are then delegated across the senior managers of an organization. Now, as a particular member of the senior management team, if I am, for example, the head of compliance, what I'm able to do is get an understanding of the obligations that face me all from inside the single system. So this can be an area where I can get an understanding of my key responsibilities as the head of compliance. But this is also an area where we can start to look at the connection between the obligations and the risks associated to it with links out to other systems, or alternatively looking at other connections that exist between the particular risks and responsibilities that I have as a particular member of the senior management team. That document, I'll come on to show you a little bit about how the attestation works in DataStore in a moment, but that document could be something that I'm required to attest to on a regular basis. So Michael was describing how quarterly a requirement might be to go in and attest to a particular document. But associated to all of these, there's a requirement to manage policies around these particular obligations and particular requirements, and these policies are targeted at all of the employees. Now, I mentioned targeted there because this is a particular view of the responsibilities and policies that I need to be aware of or need to be responsible for. And as a view of the policies that are associated to my particular role within an organization, these policies can be published to me, but I'm not having to go through multiple versions of documents or anything else. I'm going to be able to get hold of the policy I need to quickly and easily, and there's no chance of any confusion over the particular versions of policies or documents that I've attested to. What does that look like, though, from a more managerial perspective? So if I switch to this view, this is actually looking at the entire repository of policies and procedures and documents that have been built up for my organization. But I can drill into the particular areas we were just discussing to be able to highlight particular elements. So here I can go in and I can see the responsibilities map. I can drill into the policy side and be able to focus on particular policies and understand all of the versions that have been built here to be able to manage my policies across their entire life cycle. In addition to that, we're able to classify documents to be able to associate them to particular obligations and ensure that when we're monitoring and managing those particular obligations, they can be associated to particular policies that helps drive the management of those policies as we go through it. In this case, I've associated to a particular senior management function, but again, this could be other risks or obligations that need to be tracked against a particular policy. Once we have these policies built up and we have a specific version that needs to be then complied with by our employees, those can then be distributed using the communication plan that Michael was talking about earlier. So we can send out policies to targeted individuals to make sure that it's simple for them to get access to the information they need and get an understanding of their compliance against those. From that perspective, we have a simple way of being able to go in, receive notification that there's a new policy that I need to attest to, view the content of that policy, and be able to flag that I have confirmed that I've read and attest to this document. Associated to the document, again, are links where we can tie out to other various resources that we may need to, or to tie out to e-learning systems or other scenarios where we might need to get some more feedback going on. And once I've complied with that document, the system is then going to put that into my library so I can then go back and reference it at another point in time if required. The whole process is very simple, ensuring that you can get attestation from employees very quickly and easily without impacting them heavily during their day-to-day activities. In addition to the policies, we can also go in and perform assessments based around the knowledge of those policies and be able to collect an understanding of whether the employee that's attesting has fed all the information back. And we can also gather information on questionnaires to make sure that there's an ongoing understanding of everything that's going on around this. This could also be set up as a routine annual review so that as I come in as a manager, we talked about the attestations previously, this could be set up as an automated push out that I need to attest to these particular policies as I'm going through. The one other element I wanted to talk about is when we've got an idea of exactly who's been responding to these policies, we can generate those management reports and management information that Michael was talking about to be able to feed that back into the process and get an understanding of our level of compliance. Complying with policies is obviously very important, but getting an understanding that all of your teams underneath you as a senior manager have understood and have complied with that policy and attested against that policy is critical in terms of getting the information that's needed to be able to ensure that when a senior manager is attesting, they understand that their areas of responsibility are fully compliant. The last element I quickly want to touch on that I don't want to go into detail on talks around workflow capabilities. So we do have the ability to build workflows into the system to enable a regular, be it annual, be it quarterly, review of the policies and procedures and documentation that are stored inside Policy Hub to enable control over what's going on an automated basis, again, taking manual steps out of the process wherever we can. That's all I really wanted to show you as part of the capabilities of our solution. Let me pass you back to Scott now for rounding off the webinar.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it. And thank you, Michael and Jason, as well, for all the education and insights that we've gotten today on SMR. If anyone has any questions, we do have a few minutes. If you've got some questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will get to those for you. I do want to remind everybody that we have recorded this webinar and we will be posting it and sending out a link to the webinar afterwards. So everyone will have access to this so you can kind of go through the information again if there was anything that you missed or just kind of wanted to, you know, get a deeper understanding of. We'll have that available and ready for everyone. So it looks like we don't have any questions. So with that, I think I will give everybody back a few minutes in their day. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And again, if you have any questions that you think of afterwards, please feel free to give us a contact and let us know, and we will get back to you as soon as we can and help you out. So again, thank you, Michael, Jason, John. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And with that, I will wrap up and close this webinar. Thank you very much.